Hello and welcome to this webinar on the fundamentals of PSHE. My name is Joanna Feast and I'll be taking you through about 30 minutes of what the fundamentals look like and how we can approach them in Jigsaw lessons. So I'd like to start off with explaining what we'll get as a result of today's training and how it will support you now and into the future. So firstly, what it will do is refresh your awareness of the need for continued and continual excellence in PSHE for pupils and for the whole school community. It's something that we at Jigsaw feel very strongly about, is ensuring that there is really best practice as much as possible. This training will also support you to learn about the fundamental aspects of PSHE and how they are achieved through the Jigsaw approach. We'll also look at understanding how to apply the fundamentals of PSHE to Jigsaw lessons, both the primary and the secondary, and in all the subsidiary programmes as well. We'll look also at understanding how to identify any provision gaps and then how to fill them as well, and looking at how we can enjoy a greater appreciation of the very much on-purpose nature of Jigsaw and how the mindful approach of PSHE facilitates excellent practice. So lots to cover. A little bit about me, first of all. I'm Joanna Feast. I'm a senior associate consultant. I've been with Jigsaw since the very beginning. Before that, I worked as a local authority lead in school improvement, healthy schools, and SEAL, social and emotional aspects of learning. And before that, I did various things, but was also a secondary teacher. So I've worked in PSHE and actually health and education for well over 25 years now, and with over, actually, I think it's close to 1,000 schools now. So I feel that I've got quite a bit of experience to share with you and also a real passion for PSHE. So to begin then, what do we mean by the fundamentals of PSHE? Well, for me, it comes down to facilitating best practice in every single PSHE lesson that we possibly can, and thinking about how we're already doing that through Jigsaw. We don't necessarily have to start anything new. I think it's just important to be aware of the practice. Those fundamentals are in no particular order, but we'll start today by looking at evidence-based practice, looking at universal prevention versus targeted, looking at meeting pupil needs, and within that, non-judgmental facilitation. Also, we'll look at spiral curriculum, active teaching and learning, one of my favourite areas, assessment and evaluation, working in partnership, and also support and signposting for pupils as well as for staff. A lot to cover. As I say, we'll start with evidence-based practice, and really this is the bedrock of excellence in PSHE because it encompasses where we start from, where we meet children at, as it were. And one of the ways to explain this is to say that amongst many other things, we will always try to facilitate a safe and positive learning environment. And of course, within that, there will be effectiveness because it will coming from an evidence-based perspective. Then we start to go a little bit bigger and start to look at, well, in good PSHE, the evidence says we always need to start with self. So that means having a relationship with ourselves and understanding what we as people need and want and care about. And only then can we start to see from the perspective of others and what our relationships will therefore look like with those people. A really important thing that the evidence states is that we need to teach around the subject, not necessarily teaching everything head on. There is a lot of evidence to say that actually for many children, this is not a positive thing. So what we need to ensure is that we teach around in a very safe and caring way. And we do that with this next point here. We do it in a strengths-based way. And that means that we work on what is already going well for children and young people. Some people would call this an assets-based approach. Really, what we're trying to say is that we don't work from a deficit, and we particularly don't do that in Jigsaw. We work very much from a strengths-based perspective. So that means that children can see that they have made progress and that they are therefore able to make more progress, which in and of itself is a great thing, but obviously pedagogically very sound. Second to that, we've got a trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive approach. And again, the evidence here is really clear. It says that there is absolutely no place for shocking and upsetting or scaremongering amongst children and young people. There's just no place for it at all. Children don't learn when they're scared. In fact, no human really learns when they're proper scared. So we don't want to do that in PSHE. That would not constitute good practice. What does constitute good practice is that we approach things from a very positive angle. Now, by this, I don't mean toxic positivity or anything like that. I mean that we try to find the good in situations. We try to find what is already working well and do more of that. And that sounds really obvious, doesn't it? That we would want to do more of what works well. So often PSHE in the past has been the don't do that subject. And actually what we're saying is you can have a full and interesting life and explore things, and you can do it in a safe and positive way. We've also got in the evidence-based mix about being restorative. And what that means in PSHE is that we can identify when things perhaps don't go quite so well and know how we can recover them, know how we can get back to a sort of state of homeostasis, if you want to use that sort of analogy. So it's about saying, okay, how do we repair relationships? How do we recover from them? How do we restore things? And then, of course, it would be no surprise to say that evidence-based practice in PSHE very much promotes an inclusive way of working. That's not just inclusive of the 9 protected characteristics, for example. It would be ensuring that everybody feels included in a way that is meaningful for them. And the important part there is that we need to ask people, how do you feel best included? How can we do more of that? And then finally in this list, working as a whole system. And by that, we mean not working in silos, so that the whole school community works in this way. In fact, the wider school community works in this way as well. There is absolutely no point really in doing things in silos. We know this. There's nothing new here, particularly in PSHE. We've known this for forever. It's just what constitutes good practice. So if we start with our fundamentals of excellent practice in PSHE, we start from the perspective of what does the evidence say? And the evidence is very clear. And in fact, the evidence has been clear for a very, very long time. In fact, I now call it vintage evidence. It's not old-fashioned or anything. It's just been around for such a long time that it doesn't really change. The good stuff doesn't really change. We teach around subjects. We don't necessarily tackle everything head on. We teach what we want to see. We teach the skills because they are the things that will last throughout a person's life. If we try to keep teaching content over content over content, we're never going to get to the end of it. So we teach the skills that can be transferred across all of the different situations where that content might come into play. I think it's really important to mention all of these things right at the start, not saying that they're over and above important to any others, but it really just shows that actually in Jigsaw, we start from the evidence base. We don't stray from that to go in and out of fashion. We really stick to what we know works and what the evidence has been saying for decades. Now, after that comes how do we do this in PSHE? So what is the Jigsaw PSHE approach here? I don't think it'll be any surprise to anyone who already uses Jigsaw that what we're trying to do here is build the foundation of children's positive relationships with themselves. That's why we do so many of the what look like games and activities that help us to connect to ourselves and others. We work so hard in Jigsaw to bolster a child's sense of themselves, their self-esteem, their self-respect, and also their assertiveness skills. We also approach sensitive subjects in a very age and stage appropriate way. So we don't introduce things too soon, neither do we introduce them too late. And we absolutely have no space, no time for shock tactics and for victim blaming. So added to what's in the evidence base, we take that a step further and really demonstrate in Jigsaw lessons that we have no space for and no time for these ways of trying to shock children and young people into doing something different. It doesn't work, so we don't do it. What we do in Jigsaw is have a really strong sense of universality. And what this means in terms of prevention or being preventative is that we make sure that it is appropriate for all pupils, not just some, but for everyone, which means that our messages need to be fairly general. And that's the point of universal preventative PSHE. It's not just for a few, it's suitable for everyone. If you wanted it to be for a few, that would be targeted. So it's suitable and relevant for some pupils, not everybody. So when it comes to the very sort of detailed side of PSHE and some very content-driven stuff, that might not be suitable for everybody. And it is absolutely okay to say that particular lesson is not suitable for all of my pupils in my class, so it is not universal. Think about how it could be made more universal. But rest assured that in PSHE, in Jigsaw, we very much work in a way called upstream. It's a very public health model, public health way of working, really. And what we say is that we start early. As you know, in the Jigsaw PSHE program, we start from age 3. So we're working with the youngest pupils, the first opportunity that we possibly can in their more formal education. And I'll say it again, in an age and stage appropriate way. But most importantly, what we do in Jigsaw is approach things from a child's perspective. So we view things through a pupil lens. We don't try and come at it from an adult's perspective. We very much say, what is it that children need? And we try to meet their needs in an age and stage appropriate way. As you'll see in Jigsaw PSHE, everything that we do is progressive. And I'll come on to what that looks like a little bit later. It's developmental and it's needs-led. It's got a universality to it. In all of our lessons, where appropriate and where possible, we will aim for role modelling appropriately. Now, that doesn't have to be teacher unto pupil. That can be pupil to pupil as well, or even pupil to teacher. And then what we try to do in this working upstream, so that we go back to where the things start rather than trying to tackle things at the end, is that by doing this through a thriving school culture. So where everybody feels like they're included, where everybody feels like they have a voice, and where pupil development opportunities are held firmly in a position of responsibility. The next one on our list of things in no particular order is meeting needs. I will always talk about meeting pupil needs because we need to start where children are, not where we think they should be or where we imagine they might be, absolutely where they are. So we need to ensure that teaching is seen through a child's lens, not an adult one. And that will help us to ensure that children's needs are met. By that, I mean, if we think we've already covered something in PSHE for the past few years, for example, we would say that's from an adult perspective. Well, we've covered it. But what if children haven't yet got it, haven't quite grasped it, or need a little bit more time with it? That would then be seeing things from a child's perspective. What is it that we need now? And to take a different slant to that, we could also equally say that when it comes to things like some of the content in PSHE that could feel quite hard-hitting, we as adults can call it by its particular name, for example, gang culture, if you will. But for a child, there is absolutely no need to use that language because we're not teaching about gang culture. We're teaching about how we prevent it. How do we meet children's needs to prevent that? We teach about having a relationship with ourselves, first and foremost. What do we like? What do we enjoy? How do we know ourselves well? And then we can start to look at what is that like when we come to our relationship with others? How do we advocate really decent friendships in an age and stage appropriate way? And most crucially, how do we ensure that everybody feels like they belong? Because that is the thing that is going to help prevent some of these very adult strategic issues, as it were. If everyone feels like they belong and that their needs are met, that's so important, then often some of these strategic issues won't have space to grow, as it were. And we have to, as adults, be very cognizant of the fact that there will be barriers for some children in place. And those barriers are surmountable in some cases. They may well be very difficult to be surmounted in other respects. So what we need to do is to try to make things as easy as possible for children to choose the healthier or the safer option. It's not up to us to say we need them to choose the healthy option because that may look very different from person to person. My healthy is not your healthy. And we need to work with children in a way that is appropriate for them to help remove any barriers. And then we need to keep going back to children and asking them, is this what you need? Now, we don't necessarily say it in those terms. We'd be using lots and lots of PSHE related ways of asking children for their opinions, very distanced ways. And then once we know what their needs are and what the gaps might be, we can then work to fill them. Now in Jigsaw, we do this a lot. We do this a huge amount about meeting pupil need because we start with understanding the self. And that is what I would call the macro way of looking at it. So we look at ourselves and our own behaviour, and then we look at others and their behaviour. We focus very much on building relationships with ourselves before building relationships with others. And this comes, as I say, at the earliest ages. We continue to do it because it is appropriate for children to learn about themselves without always looking to the other. Then we look in slightly more filtered terms about the skills that we teach within the Jigsaw curriculum. The content covers a huge amount, but you will see time and time again the same skills being rehearsed, being practiced in a safe and positive learning environment. And one of those skills is the skill of being on purpose aware of self. And that's where the mindfulness philosophy and practice comes into play. So the calm me time in primary and then the mindfulness time in secondary. We very much focus on the language of being mindful as well, being very careful with our language and modelling that with children and around children. And then, of course, when we come to meeting children's needs, we have to look at the factors associated with mental health. This is absolutely, as we know, a prerequisite for any sort of learning, for our health, for our happiness, and our positive life choices. So if we ensure that children's mental health is as bolstered as it can possibly be through a skill-based curriculum, then we're definitely on the way to supporting children and helping meet their needs as far as we possibly can. Next stop, and it's a short one, but it's an important one, is to think about how we can facilitate really good PSHE in a non-judgmental way. And you may well be thinking, I do this already. I do this all the time in all of my lessons. If that is the case, excellent. Keep doing it. Keep doing what's working. But if you're perhaps new to PSHE or you're having a bit of a refresh here, it's really important to think about how do you ensure that pupil needs are met when you have a pupil cohort of many different needs. So, for example, when you start to teach a new topic, you will inevitably have some children in your class who have no existing knowledge, skills, or understanding. You will have some who've got a little bit of knowledge, a few skills, and some understanding. And then you'll also have people in your class with lots of knowledge, skills, and understanding. And within that, there will also probably be some myths and some misunderstandings. So what we have to do in PSHE is ensure that we teach towards the children who have very little or no existing skills, knowledge and understanding. Very, very swiftly then start to build that up so that everybody can be included. Now, how do we do this in PSHE? Well, we focus on the expertise and skill of the teacher who knows their pupils. That's the data, in inverted commas, if you like, that we really need to be aware of when we're teaching PSHE. But if we think about facilitating in a way that is non-judgmental, then we need to really focus on our learning charter and having appropriate expectations, knowing what's to come, knowing what we can do if we perhaps don't feel safe or if we don't want to participate. So that's really useful for pupils and in the classroom. But the other bit of the puzzle, if you like, is that we need to ensure that our staff are really well trained and that they are well trained not just in the facilitation of decent PSHE, but specifically how to do that with more specific issues. I haven't written any examples of what these specific issues are because it really depends on the cohort of pupils and also the needs of the teacher. So it's about understanding self and others, and then relating that to non-judgmental facilitation. Now, I said that we would come back to spiral curriculum, and I may be very much preaching to the choir here, but I think it's really important to ensure that every bit of PSHE is not assumed, that we can know where we've come from to know where we're going to and know exactly where we are right now. For the spiral curriculum, of course, what we want to do is have an iterative revisiting of topics. That's a given. But what we also need to do is revisit the subjects with the skills so that we're teaching those themes over and over again, but not in a repetitive way that's dull, but in a way that is very, very engaging. So it has to be cyclical. We know this. It has to have increased depth as well, and then also build on prior knowledge so that we're gaining breadth too. There's no point in just going linearly with this, nor is there any point on just repeating what's already been, unless, of course, that lesson hasn't sort of been grasped. So how do we do this in Jigsaw? Well, we do it through our developmental programme, whether that is for primary or for secondary, whether that is any of our other programmes as well, not just PSHE. So this really is just a screenshot of the current Jigsaw website to show that we enable children to really learn in the classroom and then apply that to their world, whether that's whilst they're still in school, outside of school, beyond school, so that they can get the best possible life chances. Now, the sixth one on the list is all about active teaching and learning. And if you have already used Jigsaw, you will know the plethora of active teaching and learning methods used. It's one of the things that when we wrote Jigsaw, we recognised quite how important it was to show such a range of active teaching and learning methods. What we're trying to do with all of these is not just offer some variety, but offer the idea that children don't have to learn in one particular way, nor two particular ways. There can be an almost unending way of ways that children can learn, which is why we really wanted to invite a curiosity from children and from staff, and also this sense of creativity as well, so that we're not just stuck doing the same things. And when we wrote it right back at the beginning, we were really keen that these messages came through very strongly. PSHE before then had been a little bit staid in some respects. It had been a little bit samey. And what we wanted to do was to show that you can teach in a really active and engaging way so that children are interested in what you're doing. Now, I will say at this point, PSHE is not meant to be an entertainment. It's not for a child, it's not for a teacher to be there to purely entertain children. They're there to encourage learning, to facilitate learning, but also foster a sense of engagement. And that doesn't have to be very loud and in your face. It can be a very quiet experience for children as well. So we really wanted, when we wrote Jigsaw, to enable this structured thinking to take place on any topic, doesn't matter which one. We also wanted to look at how we could increase the effectiveness of teaching and learning, not just in PSHE, but across all curriculum areas, because we know that PSHE is interrelated with so many other subjects of the curriculum, with so many other parts of school life. And we also wanted to provide opportunities that children could develop the really key personal skills and qualities that they think are important in their lives. So what we try to do is to help engage and motivate. And again, that doesn't have to be loud and too overpowering, because what we do in Jigsaw is really aid reflection. We spend a lot of time facilitating and advocating discussion, even in the youngest children, taking turns and trying to practice a real big range of social and emotional skills. One of the things that we put on there very much on purpose, and it's something I feel very strongly about, is depersonalized learning. And in other names, this is called distancing techniques and or illuminative techniques. So it elicits children's opinions without it being about them personally. Scenarios, drawing and writing, puppets, using the Jigsaw friends. All of these things really help to depersonalize the learning, so that it's not about a particular child, and they might get a little uncomfortable about that, understandably. It's about someone else. who may be at the same sort of age and stage of development. So they can see parallels and feel represented, but they're not necessarily making it about themselves. I hope that if you are using Jigsaw, you've really appreciated all the different types of active teaching and learning methods that are there, and that you perhaps feel inspired to do even more. Now, in Jigsaw, we absolutely have ways of assessing and evaluating. They're sort of intrinsic within every single lesson. I wanted to break down what this particular section means into 3 different ways of looking at it. We are very much assessing, teaching and learning. So that would be in the moment. That would be at the end of lessons, ensuring that the lesson outcomes have been met. That would also mean over a term or a half term. What does that look like? And using all of the assessment that's built into Jigsaw, and might not look like assessment, but it is there, to your advantage. And then you, as PSHE leader or a PSHE teacher, could use that information to monitor and review what you're doing. Is it working? And if it's not working, what can you do instead? We often talk about filling the gaps. How can we ensure that the gaps are being filled? How can we do that effectively? And that comes with experience and over time. And what we've also added into Jigsaw in huge amounts, both for children and for adults, is the opportunity to reflect, sitting back and really being curious about what's different, what's the same, what might we like instead? And then to use that reflection to plan. And then once those plans have been put in place, to reflect again. So it's a cyclical process, as all reflection should be. Nothing really new here. This is the same in any subject, but in PSHE, I think that sense of reflection is so incredibly important. And in Jigsaw, what this looks like is having a really effective, progressive, planned programme based on meeting pupil needs. So as I've mentioned, having really clear lesson outcomes, and we have both PSHE style lesson outcomes and SEAL or social and emotional skill type outcomes. So we've got knowledge and understanding, skills, attitudes and values. We check in with pupils throughout the lessons, give them a task, invite them to be involved, and then ask how it was for them. So we've got that constant back and forth, back and forth. The think, pair, share. Well, it's nothing new here, is it? It's just that it works. So let's keep doing it. Having children work in talking partners so that they can reflect for themselves and go back to their partner. And also not just the reflection opportunities that are in the lesson, which are built into all Jigsaw lessons, but that opportunity to sit comfortably with oneself and reflect afterwards. That's the sort of skill that we are really trying to encompass in all children. Now, for the Jigsaw approach, also, I wanted to talk a little bit about personal development and spiritual, moral, social, cultural development opportunities. How we can ensure that they have a real impact on children as individuals, but also on the whole school. And what we're here to do is to help create a more inclusive, respectful, and accepting environment. We do that through our Help Me Reflect, our reflection time, primary, secondary. So we really support children with their learning and their personal development. Part of personal development, a massive part, is being able to notice oneself, what one likes, what one dislikes, how one has made progress, how one might still like to make progress, and so on. Having time to reflect on what that looks like, rather than just being part of a barrage of learning opportunities that are done unto, rather than a more intrinsic development opportunity. We have mapped to SMSC development opportunities throughout Jigsaw. I wonder if anybody looks at those sorts of things anymore, but they definitely are there. And of course, this links back to having a spiral curriculum. So we work in a very progressive and developmental way in PSHE and Jigsaw, all the way from age 3 to age 16. Now, something that is not often thought about in PSHE, I think, particularly when a school uses a scheme like Jigsaw PSHE, is how to work with partners. And I wanted to share that actually we are already doing this, no doubt, in PSHE. First of all, in school, working with our internal partners, making cross-curricular links. And these have already been done in Jigsaw through science, PE, English, literacy, drama, and so on. So working with our colleagues in school and just noting Not necessarily making a big deal of it, but noting where what we learn in PSHE is mirrored in other subjects and vice versa. Also using the skills that are taught in other subjects and infiltrating those, as it were, into PSHE and vice versa. And then working with external partners. Now, this would only be relevant if you wanted to work in a more targeted way. And what I would suggest here is, well, the evidence says is the class teacher is absolutely the best placed person to teach PSHE. External partners may come in, particularly in secondary, and they are there to very much enhance what the teacher does, not replace. So with Jigsaw PSHE, you may think that actually this is a universal preventative program. There is no opportunity for external partners to come in. And that's not to say they're not welcome. It's just to say that we've written Jigsaw in a way where that is not necessarily needed. If you do, though, identify that pupils, certain pupils, maybe 1, 2, 3, in your care need extra support, that's when an external partner like a charity might come in and support those particular children. So that's the targeted support. What you can also use those external partners for is to learn from them as a professional so that they can train you on a specific subject area, for example. That might be knowledge, that might be signposting, and that you can understand the topic or the situation a little better. It doesn't necessarily mean that you then bring that into your learning in the classroom, because that is for you to understand, not necessarily to pass on, because it's possibly not age and stage appropriate, and it may possibly cause children to feel discomfort. They may feel scared about something. So that's why we teach around the subject, what skills we want, and we as teachers can understand the situation in its complexity. We don't teach everything that we know about it, because that would be inappropriate. Now, the next point about what makes really, really good PSHE is the support that's available after the lesson and where we find that support. I think sometimes my work in schools anyway, people very much seem to focus on outside of school. Where can we find help outside of school? And that's valiant and to be applauded. So do that, but also think about what have we got in school? Because I have never been into a school in my whole career where there isn't a wealth of experience there already. Now, it may be that that experience is not what's needed for a particular situation, but it doesn't mean that it's not useful for another one. So look for what's within and then look for what's outside of school. Really important also that pupils know where to find help within school and also outside of school. And in Jigsaw, we really try to advocate this as much as possible through our supportive signposting alongside our really proactive safeguarding procedures. So we very much will always say, if you need to report this up to your DSL, please do so. If you need to, and so on. So that then really helps with effective leadership and management. And that helps with better wellbeing approaches, better health and better inclusion. We know children need to be empowered, first of all, to understand themselves and their minds so that they can then now and in the future combat stress, combat pressure and any influences that might cause them harm. They can only do that, though, if they first and foremost have the skills and then they know where to find help later on. And also in Jigsaw, what we try to do in every single lesson for secondary is signpost at the end of each lesson. For primary, there may well be certain lessons where that is pertinent, but it's not in every single lesson like it is in the 11 to 16 programme. We really ensure a huge and comprehensive package of training, support and guidance for PSHE subject leaders. And this webinar is one of them. But what we also do is offer management tools in the 3 to 11 and the 11 to 16 programme that support teachers to monitor, to report, to evaluate and to plan really well to ensure pupil needs are met as much as they can be. And I wanted to link that back to the 3 I's of Ofsted. So the intent. I keep saying the same thing, but it's really good that it's said within the Ofsted framework as well, is that how do we ensure our PSHE curriculum is planned to meet our pupil needs? And it's a question that needs to be asked, whether you're using your own lessons or whether you're using Jigsaw PSHE lessons. That is absolutely crucial. The thing that is at stake here is not whether you follow a program, it's are you meeting children's needs? So what is your intent? And then how are you implementing it? Through a spiral curriculum. We already know Jigsaw does this. We already know that this is great practice. But we also need to be thinking about, if we're implementing this well, we need to be well trained as staff members. And then thirdly, what is the impact? Well, we know that PSHE, when taught really well, and it lands well with children because it meets their needs, that contributes to all of the sort of the best parts of life as well. And it means that we can be assured, because this is what the data says, that children will have improved academic performance, particularly for the most disadvantaged. So we're preparing children for every stage of their lives, not just for when they leave school, but for now as well. So coming towards the end then, what is the purpose of PSHE? Why do we have to have all these fundamentals in place? Well, what we're after is the ability to learn and rehearse the skills for positive behaviour change. And that could be in terms of being healthier, being safer, feeling better. We want to have positive behaviour change in children and young people, and when they become adults, for the same thing to happen. So that's what we try and do in PSHE, and that's why the 9 fundamentals are so incredibly important. I'll leave you now with the question is, what questions do you have? Is there something that you would like clarity on? Is there something that you feel you'd like to know a little bit more about? If there is, then do get in contact. I'd like to encourage you, if you wouldn't mind, to do a quick survey once you've done this training, because it really does help us develop what is needed for when we come to do more training. So thank you very much for joining me today. I very much appreciate it. Do let us know if you've got any questions, and keep up those incredibly high standards in PSHE to meet children and young people's needs. Thank you.